speaker series this morning that St. Croix River Association hosts in collaboration with the National Park Service, who I'll introduce in a moment here. We are very pleased to be the Friends Group for the National Park Service, and we do a lot of programs with them. We are the voice for the river. We're the advocacy group for the St. Croix River watershed. Our primary work is in water quality, land protection, and connecting people to the river. We have a couple events coming up I want to point out. First of all, if you are not getting our newsletter now, grab one, take it home with you. You can sign up just to get the newsletter and not be a supporter. We prefer you were, of course, a supporter. And in that case, thank you very much, you too. We have membership brochures out there, and there's a convenient envelope inside you're welcome to do. And if you want to just donate for beverages or whatever this morning, we're very happy to take those donations as well. We have a couple of things coming up that are, one is really fun and the other one is really informational. The first one I'm going to mention is on May 7th. We have just finalized arrangements for showing the movie Where the Yellowstone Goes. It's a really lovely adventure from the Yellowstone River at the park exit, not entrance, I guess, all the way to where it meets the Missouri. It's a lovely film. It's beautifully done. Producer Robert Hawkins will be here for Q&A after that. And there is a small little issue that they had about 2 years ago where a pipeline burst. And that's addressed in that movie. And speaking of pipeline, we have our very own Pipeline 61, which is tripling its capacity. And River Association feels like it's really important for the public to be aware. We're not going to stop the pipeline. We're not advocates for no oil, obviously. We all need it. But we do think that the safety measures should be in place, and they ought to be thinking about things like if there's an oil spill in the winter, how do you clean it up? So we'll be holding a public forum May, Monica?
14th.
And it'll be in Spooner.
Spooner at the high school auditorium.
And we have speakers coming from actually around the country. So that will be a terrific forum. You're all encouraged to attend if you can. It's in the evening. It should be very well attended. So with that, I'm going to introduce Chris Stein, the superintendent to the park, one of our best partners. Yeah.
Wonderful to see such a great crowd, that's for sure. And I want to thank Deb and Monica for hosting this program for the National Park Service. The Riverway, the National Scenic Riverway, is a national park, and that's something I want to make sure that all of you take away from my message to you this morning. We have a different last name. It's called the National Scenic Riverway. But if somebody was to stop you outside the library here today and say, where is your nearest national park, what would you say? Right next door. Right there. Good, you get it. I was once talking to a prominent group here in town, and I asked that same question. And I happened to be in uniform that day with my Smoky Bear hat. And one fellow said, I know where the nearest national park is. And I said, oh, tell me. Glacier. Anyway, it is with great honor and pleasure today to introduce Karen Oberhauser, Dr. Karen Oberhauser. I have my teleprompter here. So, Karen is a professor at the University of Minnesota. She's with the Department of Fisheries, Wildlife, and Conservation Biology. And she and her students do research on monarch ecology. They kind of use the traditional methods of research, field work and in the lab and all that. But Karen has a passion for engaging citizen scientists. And I'm sure she'll get a little bit into that. Look there. I want to talk about this project that you and Charlotte. I think that's cool. Back in 1996, so she's been at it for a while. How many years has it been?
Since I started studying monarchs, 30.
30 years.
20 years since that project.
I feel a little bit late in the game. That's okay. Better late than never. But back in 1996, she and a graduate student, Michelle Prisby, started a nationwide citizen science project called the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, which continues to engage hundreds of volunteers throughout North America. Karen is passionate about the conservation of the world's biodiversity. Thank you. Who in this room is passionate about the conservation of the world's biodiversity? Good. It's always nice to talk to a group that is similar. Oftentimes I'm in the other type of groups, so this is really nice. She believes that the connections the projects she works on, promote these strong connections between monarchs, humans, and the natural world, and they lead to meaningful conservation action. Thank you. And by the way, just so you know, you're an inspiration to us. And at the end of this program, Jonathan Moore from my staff will talk about a project that we're involved in. And I have to tell you, you inspired us. Karen is the chair of the Monarch Joint Venture Project and a founding officer of the Monarch Butterfly Fund. And this is real nice. In 2013, Karen received a White House Champion of Change Award for her work on citizen science. Thank you, Karen. It's really an honor to be able to meet you.
Well, thank you for that great introduction, Chris. And you are an inspiration to me. I've been doing a lot of work with federal agencies over the last decade, and you all really deserve our thanks and applause, and all of you for being here today. I know quite a few of you, and thank you for all of the work that you do for conservation. Before I get started, I would just like to know if it's anybody's birthday today.
How about yesterday?
Yesterday was your birthday? Is it yours today?
Today.
Oh my goodness. Well, what is your name?
Al.
Al. And what is your name?
Roger.
Roger. Alan Roger. Happy birthday. I have a book for you.
Thank you. Wonderful.
And I'll sign those after. That's a field guide to the things you see in milkweed. So I think since you're here, you're probably kind of interested in milkweed. So happy birthday. Wow, that's amazing. Usually there's not someone with the exact day. Thank you for coming on your birthday.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have some good news, bad news talk today, and hopefully you'll all be going away thinking about things that you can do to help this little piece of the world's biodiversity, monarch butterflies. So I'm going to talk about dwindling numbers. I'm going to talk about the fact that the monarch is an iconic insect. By saving monarchs, we're saving a lot of other things at the same time. I'm going to talk about how we're documenting monarch numbers, but how we can use the information we get to move beyond that. So there's a lot of message in my talk there. Would it be possible to turn the lights? Yeah. Is that too, like, does anyone think they're going to fall asleep? Okay, good. So I'm a conservation biologist. I was actually trained, my schooling was before the field, there even was a field of conservation biology. I'm a trained ecologist. That means I'm really interested in gaining knowledge about the natural world. And I think that knowledge is very important to the field of conservation biology. In order to preserve the world's biodiversity, we need to know what organisms need, how those needs can be met, why in some cases organisms' needs aren't being met, and what we need to do. But that's not enough. Okay, we can't just go out there and study organisms until we're blue in the face. Conservation requires action. So that's going to be a message of my talk, that we need to move beyond documenting things. We need to do something about them. And finally, it's very easy these days to kind of lose hope. There are a lot of scary messages out there about climate change and habitat loss and exotic species and pollution and lots of bad news, but we need to be hopeful. So I want you to go away with a message of hope as well, that there's scary stuff, we need to face it, but we can do something about it. And I think that's one of the reasons that all of you are coming to a talk on this beautiful Saturday. So here's what I'm going to talk about, just in case the dark puts you to sleep and you wake back up, you'll know sort of where I am. I'm going to give you a little bit about the really amazing life cycle of monarchs, their complex and interesting life cycle. talk about people's interest in monarchs, the iconic feature of monarchs, talk about the fact that their numbers are declining and why that's happening, and then think about how we should respond. So there's that little roadmap for the next 40 minutes or so. Okay, the complex life history. So when I think about the life history or the cycle of monarchs, I think about kind of two different kinds of cycles. One is their individual life cycle. So what an individual monarch butterfly goes through in its progression from an egg. It's an egg for about 4 to 5 days, and the egg hatches, becomes a caterpillar. We have 5 larval instars, which are the stages that the monarchs go through in between shedding their skin or molting. So here's a picture of an egg just to give you a size scale. That's about the size of a pinhead. Out hatches a first instar. It sheds its skin and becomes a second, third, fourth, and fifth instar. And during this period, it gains about 2,000 times its body weight in 10 or 11 days. So the women in the audience, imagine babies that you may have had. 7 pounds or so, think of 2,000 times that in 10 days. It makes you tired to think of that. Then they're a chrysalis or a pupa. That stage lasts about the same amount of time as the caterpillar, about 9 to 11 days, depending on temperature. And then they become, then they become the adult. So that's the individual life cycle. During this time, monarchs require milkweed. Okay, the only kind of food that they'll eat is milkweed. One of the handouts outside it's called Plant Milkweed for Monarchs, and that shows you that there are many kinds of milkweed. There's not just the common milkweed that we're probably most familiar with, but monarchs can eat all of the kinds of milkweed that are on that sheet and even more. So here we have a picture of a first instar caterpillar just hatching out of its egg. Its mother has laid her egg on this milkweed plant. This is a common milkweed plant. Usually they just lay 1 egg, so if you're out looking for monarch eggs, you usually just find 1 on the bottom of a leaf. But every once in a while, excuse me, you'll find more than 1 egg, and here it looks like there are just 6, but there's another one hiding right there. So that was a leaf in the wild, and there were 7 monarch eggs on that leaf, probably laid by different females, but they could have been laid by the same one, we don't know for sure. They require lots of milkweed. And like Chris said, we have a project at the University of Minnesota called the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, and we have data from almost 20 years now of people collecting data, going out and looking at milkweed plants and looking at eggs and caterpillars. And from that, we've done kind of some interesting little algebra here to estimate that monarchs need, to get to 1 adult that'll go to Mexico, we need about 30 plants. 30 milkweed plants to get to 1 adult. Now that's not because they eat so much. They do eat a lot, but not 30 plants worth. That's because there's a lot of mortality. So it's, we need a lot of milkweed out there on the landscape. So we think of mortality in insects, we often think of the adult stage. So here are some pictures. This one, it's not the greatest picture in the world, but it's a frog that caught a monarch. There's a monarch wing in that frog's mouth. It ate it. These are some birds in Mexico, an oriole and a grosbeak that eat monarchs. Here's a mantid that caught an adult monarch. But the vast majority of the mortality occurs when they're caterpillars and eggs. So here's a little red velvet spider mite eating a monarch egg. We watched it just suck it dry. There's a second instar caterpillar that's being eaten by a wheel bug larva, a stink bug, spine-shouldered stink bug that's eating this 4th instar. Some ants that have attacked the monarch. This monarch actually survived that attack. And one of a very important source of mortality is a parasitoid fly that lays an egg. So this fly looks kind of like a housefly, lays eggs on the skin of caterpillars, can lay multiple eggs, and instead of a monarch, you get these little maggots that turn into a fly, and they kill quite a few monarchs. So there's a lot of mortality. We think about 2 to 5% of the monarchs that are laid as eggs actually turn into adult butterflies. That's why we need so much milkweed out there. Okay, so the caterpillar stage, the stage that depends on that milkweed that we need to have on the landscape. When the caterpillar hatches, the first thing it does is eats its eggshell. So here you have a first instar, and you might be thinking that doesn't look like a monarch. That's because they don't get the stripes, the characteristic monarch stripes on their bodies, until they've eaten some milkweed. So this one is just eating its eggshell, hasn't eaten any milkweed yet, but once they start eating the milkweed, they get the pigments that they need to make these characteristic stripes. And I just put this picture in here because I just wanted to show you that we think sometimes that, because we think of caterpillars as molting, and we might have learned at school that their skin can't stretch enough for them to grow. It stretches a lot. These are both second instar caterpillars. This is a newly molted second instar caterpillar, and this is a second that's about ready to become a third. But you can see that they do a lot of growing within each instar, but then they reach a point where they need to mold and get a new layer of skin that can grow a little bit more. Okay, so the next, the caterpillar moves away from its milkweed plant, finds a site to pupate or turn into a pupa or a chrysalis. And here you see it hanging upside down on the milkweed leaf, getting ready to shed its skin. Okay, here it's shedding its skin. So this is the old skin. So some people think that it spins the outer covering of the chrysalis, but that's really just what's under the skin. So it's shedding its skin. This is what's underneath. You can see that the wings are already formed in the caterpillar. They've started to form, and a lot of the adult organs start to form in the caterpillar stage. You see it shedding a little more. And I had another student named Michelle who always talked about that as the pupa dance. And she would do this great little pupa dance where it wiggles around and tries, some of you have probably seen this, it wiggles around and tries to get that old skin off. So it kind of bothers it to have that old skin. So it wiggles back and forth until that skin drops down to the ground. And you see it like this, kind of getting into its regular chrysalis shape. And then it looks like that. It's like that for about 11 days or so, 10 or 11 days. That, when you're rearing a lot of monarchs, that's the stage that's the easiest to take care of. You don't need to feed them at all. When the butterfly is ready to eclose or come out of the chrysalis, I actually have a t-shirt out there that says eclose on it that has a picture of a monarch eclosing. You start to see the wing patterns through the chrysalis covering. And one of the things that's happening the very end of the pupal development is the monarch forms its scales. The scales form and get their coloration. So you're actually seeing the developing monarch through here. It emerges, hangs down, and stretches out its wings. Its wing blood pumps into its wings, and about 4 hours later, it can fly. So we have a male and a female. Can somebody tell me the difference between the male and the female monarch? Yes, we have somebody there. Right. Okay, so the male is the one on the right. Thank you. What is your name? Angie. Angie knew that. This is the male that has these little dots on his wings. They're pretty similar. The female doesn't have those dots on the wing. She has slightly wider wing veins. These look wider. They have more brown scales on them. And the spaces in between the veins sometimes look a little bit browner. They have more brown scales mixed in with the orange and the orange scales there. So, but they look pretty similar. Okay, so that's the individual life cycle. Then we have this really amazing annual life cycle, which, just like the individual life cycle, has 4 stages to it. It has migrating south, overwintering, migrating north, and breeding. We're in this stage right now, but I'm going to start with the migrating south, just to kind of take you through the life. So we have monarchs, and we can think of monarchs in Wisconsin and Minnesota and all over this region of the country, emerging in mid to late August or September. They fly down, they kind of merge together in southern Texas and fly to overwintering sites in Mexico. Every once in a while, the ones along the East Coast miss that west turn and go down into the peninsula of Florida. They join a continuously breeding population down here. We really don't know the degree to which that population contributes back into the migratory population. Some of them end up in islands in the Caribbean. There's another fairly distinct population west of the Rocky Mountains that overwinters along the coast of California. But we know that there's some interchange between these 2 populations. Monarchs have been marked and tagged in Arizona and have been found in the overwintering sites in Mexico. So it's not like a Berlin Wall of the eastern and the western populations. So they get to their overwintering sites, stay there. They arrive there in late October, early November. They stay there all winter long through the middle of March, and then they start to migrate back. So the very same monarchs that left Wisconsin come back. They don't get it back to up here, but they lay eggs in this part of the southern United States, and then their offspring continue the journey north. And they go through 2 to 3 generations up here that don't migrate, and then the cycle starts again. Now these 2 to 3 generations live about, oops, I'm having a little trouble with my buttons here. These 2 to 3 generations live about a month as adults, where the migratory ones can live 8 or 9 months, and they can live longer because, for 2 reasons, they're not investing in reproduction, and they're in a cool place where their whole metabolism just slows down a little bit. Now, one of the reasons that we're concerned about and that we're focusing on monarch conservation is we can track the numbers of monarchs because they all join together in these overwintering sites that I've circled. So this phase of their life cycle, when the monarchs arrive in these overwintering sites in California, where they overwinter here, we can actually count the numbers of monarchs. And in the overwintering sites in Mexico, we can measure the area that they occupy. So they cover trees. I'll have a picture of that in a minute. They cover trees. We measure the area occupied by those trees. So we can measure how many there are when they come and how many there are just before we leave to really get a good handle on how the monarch population is doing. I'm going to punch it through. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to just show you some pictures of that cycle. So here and what they need during each phase of that annual cycle. So we have during the fall, they're for the most part not laying eggs or breeding. They need nectar. They actually gain weight on that migratory flight, so they need a lot of flowers. So we need all along that migratory pathway, not just milkweed monarchs need, it's food for the adults as well. That's many species of flowers. This is in my yard in Minnesota. This is an ironweed, really wonderful nectar plant. They also need roosting trees, so as they're moving down, they stop and rest in trees, often many of them at once. This is a mesquite tree in Texas. In the overwintering sites, they need a safe place to stay. Their job in the overwintering sites is mostly to just stay alive for 6-7 months. They need to just stay alive and make it until the next year. So they, for the most part, just hang on trees. They're just kind of hanging there. And then every once in a while, you have these big flights. This is why people love to go to the sites in Mexico. Just the butterflies will just pour off of the trees. You'll see just thousands of them. As they're migrating north in the spring, again, the adults need nectar, but here's when they start to need the milkweed. So here you see a female laying an egg. This is a green milkweed, Asclepias viridis, that grows in Texas. So the female has found that little tiny plant just starting out and is laying an egg on it. And then when they get up here at the end of their migration, they need more milkweed. So here you have a female laying an egg on swamp milkweed or Asclepias incarnata, the caterpillar eating it, and they also need nectar. So we have this chain. It's like any chain. It's just as strong as its weakest link. We need to make sure that monarchs have what they need through this entire link. But every time I go to Mexico and look at all of those monarchs in the trees, I think that every single one of those monarchs has a story, and every single story started up here on a milkweed plant. So the basis of this whole cycle is milkweed. There we go. Okay, now I'm going to lose it. There we go. It kind of loses its punch. The magic of it. So here we have the importance of milkweed. This is what we need. Okay. So we're all here today. There are millions of kinds of insects in the world. We're all here hearing about one insect. People are very interested in monarchs. In some ways, that's a little humbling to me as someone who studies monarchs, how interested people are in monarchs. Just some evidence of their interest in monarchs. It's not just in the United States, but it's also in Mexico. This is a celebration of the Day of the Dead, which is a holiday that's in Mexico on November 2nd, right after Halloween. And the monarchs are coming back to these overwintering sites right at the Day of the Dead. And that's kind of built into the culture there, that the monarchs represent people's ancestors returning on the Day of the Dead. It's kind of a magical holiday. So we have a lot of celebrations and a lot of monarch imagery in the celebrations centered on the Day of the Dead. This is the license plate in the state of Michoacan, which is the state where most of the monarchs overwinter. This is the 50 peso bill that has monarchs on it. They're really wonderful money in Mexico. So much prettier than our money. But a lot of interest in Mexico and monarchs. Monarchs are the state insect or butterfly of 7 states. I looked up what your state butterfly was. You don't have a state butterfly here in Wisconsin. Maybe you could do something about that. So, yeah, here are all the 7 states, including Minnesota. Jesse Ventura signed this bill into law in 1998. That was kind of exciting. Last year, in February of 2014, President Obama and President Peña Nieto in Mexico and Prime Minister Harper got together in Toluca, Mexico, and they couldn't agree on the Keystone Pipeline. They couldn't agree on immigration. They couldn't agree on trade policy. But those guys agreed that they were going to create a working group to study ways to protect the monarch butterfly. So they got together and talked about monarchs. And that's one of the reasons there is so much interest right now in federal agencies and monarchs. They're getting the direction way from the top. Okay, so citizen science. Monarchs are very intensively monitored. And I think that this is a real example of people's connection with monarchs. So luckily, you're not going to have a test. You don't have to memorize this long list here. The point is it's a really long list. And every single one of these bullet points is a program that engages people in monitoring monarchs or butterflies. And every single one of those programs is creating data that helps us understand more about monarchs. We run one of these, like Chris said in his introduction, the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, but that's just one of a long list out of the University of Minnesota. In this project, and I have a few brochures along, people go out and look at milkweed plants and count the number of eggs and caterpillars that they see on those milkweed plants. But I'm not going to show you data from our project because I'm going to pick one that's a little more timely right now. So this is data from a program called Journey North, which is a really amazing monitoring project where every single one of these points, so if you just imagine one of the points on this map, is somebody who went out and reported the first monarch that they saw during the year. And the different colors are different dates, so we can actually see the monarchs moving north. I'm going to let it go one more time and just kind of watch where the orange colors are down at the bottom of the map. And what this is, remember this is the area I showed you where that generation coming back. So this is the generation coming back from Mexico. Then all of a sudden, they're down here for a couple of weeks without moving. They explode into the northern part of their range. And the red and pink and purple dots are the next generation of the year that people are seeing. So this is a compilation of many years, but I just downloaded for you last night. So this is what's happening this year. Okay, we're seeing monarchs. Here are the dates up here, and we're going to go, you can see. So we have not gotten to the second generation yet. Okay, we're going to have a couple more weeks just down in the southern part of their range. And then in about 2 weeks, we're going to start seeing them moving into this northern part of their breeding range. So we can track this in real time. We're seeing monarchs as they're moving north this year. Okay, people monitor monarchs. People create habitat for monarchs. And this habitat can be in many different areas. If you have a yard, if you work at a nature center, if you have anywhere that you have control over a little bit of land, you can help monarchs by creating habitat. This is a nature center. This is somebody's backyard. This is an old field. It's in the CRP program, Conservation Preserve program. This is kind of an unnatural density of milkweeds. When I look at that, remember the Wizard of Oz where Dorothy walks into the poppies and sort of gets lightheaded. I'm sure. I imagine a female monarch flying into that field and starting to feel a little bit lightheaded when she sees all of that milkweed. This is a more realistic picture of what milkweed is. This is in some Forest Service land. And in a lot of cases, people are registering this habitat as way stations. So there are just a little bit over 10,000 way stations that people have created and put signs up showing that they are protecting habitat for monarchs. So this is a program run out of the University of Kansas, Monarch Watch, that has this way station program that just is kind of a sign. I'm doing something for monarchs, but there are going to be a lot of other organisms who use these habitats as well. So people are really interested in monarchs. Okay, so I think about this a lot. I think I might just start pushing the buttons. Move over here. Most of my colleagues study organisms that people really don't care about. And I study this organism that everyone really cares about, and I think about why that is. For one thing, monarchs are beautiful. They're not some little brown moth that you wouldn't really care about. They're very beautiful. They're beautiful as adults, but they're also beautiful as caterpillars. Okay, we'll just do this. As caterpillars and pupae. The caterpillars are a beautiful stage of the life, as are the pupae, and people recognize those things and love them. They're familiar. I've heard a lot of stories of people that remember incidents with monarchs from their childhood. They remember raising them. They remember seeing monarchs in trees. They remember seeing monarchs in their backyard. They've been seeing them since they were little kids. They're interesting. Maybe only a scientist could appreciate this picture, but these are cages at the University of Minnesota where I work and study monarchs. We were doing some reproductive behavior experiments. So these were basically, we call them mating cages. And the monarchs were in there. We had lots of monarchs in those cages. But we have learned so much from monarchs. We've learned about interactions between host plants and caterpillars and herbivores of many kinds. We've learned about interactions between herbivores and their natural enemies, predators and parasites. We've learned about migration. We've learned about genetics. We've learned about population structure from this really amazing insect. And finally, they're impressive. A monarch butterfly, an adult monarch, weighs as much as a paperclip, the little kind of paperclip, half a gram. And that monarch can fly all the way from here to Mexico. Think of the wind. And we think of wind in April. And that's very impressive. Stay there all winter and come halfway back. So people like things that are impressive. Now, so people feel strongly about butterflies. And this is, I'm kind of like Nicole Kidman, but I was on an airplane the other month. And I saw this in the magazine, and she says, it's so bizarre. I'm not scared of snakes or spiders, but I'm scared of butterflies. There's something eerie about them, something weird. And there is, some people have a phobia, but that is very rare, luckily. So most people don't feel like Nicole Kidman, but more people feel like H.W. Bates. If you learned about mimicry, you maybe remember learning in college about Batesian mimicry, organisms that look alike, mimic each other. One is toxic, one isn't. Well, that was discovered by a guy named H.W. Bates in the 1800s, and he said, therefore, the study of butterflies, creatures selected as the types of airiness and frivolity, will someday be valued as one of the most important branches of biological science. But more people feel like Bates than Nicole Kidman. Okay, so despite this strong interest in monarchs, their numbers are declining. And I'm not going to really labor on this point, just kind of make it and say we need to do something about it. So this is the area occupied by monarchs in their Mexican colonies. So here you see, this is a tree trunk that's covered by monarch butterflies, and people can measure the area. They go around, they used to use tape measures. In the 1990s, we would go out with tape measures and measure the size of the colony. Now people use GPS, it's much easier. They measure the area of the polygons and all the different overwintering sites. And this is the area occupied by hectares. A hectare is around 2 acres. You can kind of think of it as that way. And you can see there's a ton of up and down. It's an insect population. Insects can lay lots of eggs. A female butterfly probably lays 400 or 500 eggs in her lifetime. When you have that high a reproductive rate, you get a lot of cycling. There's a lot of things going on that can affect their population numbers. But there's this variation, but you can see that there's kind of this decline, with a lot of noise. It's not just going down like this, it's going down like this. So 2013, the winter of 2013-14 was the lowest year ever. The year of 2014, the year that we just ended, was the second lowest year ever. Over over 20 years we've been measuring. Just an aside, this is the first year that I went to the colonies, so it was really quite amazing that year. But so I've really seen this. I've seen this happen. It's very noticeable. It's 18 versus less than 1 hectare. So that's what we need to deal with. And I'm working in a lot of groups right now. The average, if we took the average of all these years, it would be just about 6 hectares. We haven't had an average year since 2006. All of the years since 2006 have been below average. So the Fish and Wildlife Service has said that our goal is to get back to that old average. What do we need to do to get back to this many monarchs? So that's what we're thinking about right now. Because of this, the Endangered Species Coalition put monarchs on their vanishing list in 2014. The World Wildlife Fund put them on their top 10 species to watch in 2010. And one of the reasons that the migration is at risk is because it depends on such huge areas of land. Okay, we've got the summer breeding up here, the spring breeding down here, this migration flowing through kind of with this orange arrow right here. This is a lot of land to be thinking about for this eastern. I'm just thinking about the eastern migratory population right now. I'm not really going to talk about the western one. But there is just a lot of things going on that need to happen for monarchs to be preserved over such a large area. Oops. You may have heard about this. There's been a petition submitted to the Fish and Wildlife Service to list monarchs as an endangered species. It's over 100 pages long that documents the monarch decline and the reasons for that decline. So that's something that we're kind of all thinking about right now. So we have a lot of reaction to this decline, and we have a statistically and biologically significant decline. So why is this happening? What are some of the reasons for the decline? Remember I said in order to solve the problems, we need to understand what's causing them. So the big thing for most of the organisms that we think about, and we know a lot of organisms are declining, big thing is changing habitat use. We're losing the habitat that species need. In the United States, we're losing over 5,000 acres a day to real estate and energy development. So this is the kind of thing that's happening on some of our land. In just this 5-year period, over 1 million acres of native prairie. That's a really rare kind of landscape. Were converted to cropland, and all of this land contained milkweed and nectar plants. Now the pessimist in me can look at this picture and think that is so depressing, but the optimist in me can look at this and say there's still a lot of green in that picture. And all of that green doesn't have to be monocultures of non-native grass, which is what lawns are. There can be other habitat. If we were dealing with wolves or spotted owls or a lot of other organisms that we hear about, they couldn't live in this habitat. We wouldn't want wolves ranging around in this neighborhood, but monarchs could live there. You don't see a lot of gardens in here, but they could. That could be monarch habitat. So that's what we have going for monarchs. Another thing that's happened is changing agricultural practices. So in 2000, the year 2000, I did a study with several other people all over the United States and into Canada, and we estimated that over 50 times more monarchs came out of agricultural fields than came out of natural habitat. So here we have a corn row that has some milkweed growing in it. Here we have a soybean field with a milkweed growing in it and a female monarch laying an egg on that milkweed. And it's not that this was, there's less milkweed in this habitat than the natural habitat, but there was just so much corn and soybean on the landscape. So they were using that. And then with the adoption of herbicide-tolerant crops, that habitat has been lost. With Roundup Ready crops, which are this summer going to be more than just Roundup Ready. There are going to be other herbicide tolerances put into these plants. So here's what happens to the milkweed. Now this is, agricultural practices change. We get more effective at growing crops, but this is the fact that we lost all of this habitat, so we need to figure out how to make up for that. This isn't going to change, and I'm not saying it's the farmer's fault. I'm just saying we need to understand that and know how much habitat we need to make up because of this changing agricultural practice that took that milkweed out of the row crop fields. And here you can see the adoption rate of these crops. This top line is soybeans. This bottom line is corn. So when we did that study in 2000, there was just a tiny bit of herbicide-tolerant corn on the landscape. There was quite a lot of milkweed in the cornfields, and both corn and soybeans have increased until we're around 90% with both of them. The middle line is just the average of both. So that's what we need to deal with. It's not just in the United States that we're losing habitat. We're losing habitat in Mexico, although the Mexican government has really slowed down the amount of logging. But in these forests where the monarchs winter, big trees are being cut down. Trees are being cut down right where the monarchs are. There are monarchs flying around in that picture. Large areas are being cleared. And now really the only logging that's happening is on a pretty small scale. This is called horse logging, where people are hauling off individual logs to use in building houses, furniture, fires, lots of uses. And then there are a lot of other factors. Insecticides, so mosquito sprays kill monarchs. Climate change is another factor that's important. This was a storm that occurred in the overwintering sites in the winter of 2002. The monarchs were knocked out of the trees, and climate change is predicted to make these kinds of storms more frequent in the overwintering sites. Up here we have more concentrated rainfall in the summer, so longer periods of dry areas, which decrease the quality of the milkweed. People are concerned about invasive species. This is just getting to be a problem on the eastern side of Wisconsin. There's this plant called a swallowwort. It's not a problem in Minnesota yet, but it's a plant it's closely related to milkweed. It's a vining plant that comes in. Female monarchs recognize it and will lay their eggs on it, but the caterpillars can't eat it. So we call it a sing, where the eggs just kind of get wasted when they're laid on that plant. And there are lots of other probably more minor causes, but collisions with vehicles. So people are concerned. I had a guy call me last fall and he said, I know it's killing all the monarchs. It's when they're migrating, they're getting hit by cars. So you've probably all seen that in a vehicle. So we have this problem. We have lots of causes of this problem. How do we respond? So we can respond to any one of those things. I mean, we can decrease the impacts of insecticides on monarchs. We can decrease the impacts of climate change by making sure they have plenty of habitat spread all over so that they can go somewhere else if the climate is bad in one area. We can think about habitat loss. So here are just some things we can do. And I want to go back, kind of end where I started. Conservation requires knowledge. So we need to keep monitoring monarchs. We need to see what's happening to the population. We document the declines, that was the title of my talk, but we can move beyond that and document our successes. Okay, we can see how the population is improving. We can study the factors that affect monarch survival. There's a lot of mortality. Can we change those rates of mortality? Or movement over the landscape, or reproductive success. Okay, we can think of what will improve monarchs' chances of surviving. But then conservation requires action. So you can be involved in the knowledge part by contributing to these citizen science projects. You can be involved in the action part. So what a lot of things we're working on is addressing habitat loss. So this is kind of, you think, this is a weird picture. To be putting in something about addressing habitat loss for monarchs. But this is actually a milkweed field. This is somebody growing a whole field of milkweed, and that's producing milkweed seeds to be used in habitat restoration projects. So we're really working on increasing the seeds that's available for your conservation efforts. Increasing the amount of nectar on the landscape, addressing habitat loss in the overwintering sites, educating and advocating. I brought along a few handouts that are outside. These handouts are available and many others for download on the Monarch Joint Venture website. I'm going to show you that in a minute. There's a lot you can do for educating and advocating, supporting organizations that are working to preserve monarchs and pollinators. We get into a little more detail on these things. So finally, conservation requires hope. It is hopeful to me that all of you came here on this Saturday. That makes me feel really hopeful. It's hopeful to me that all of these organizations at the international level in Mexico, the United States, and Canada are working together to support monarch conservation. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Monarch joint venture, which is actually, it's not 14, it's 24 organizations that are promoting monarch conservation in the US, including the National Park Service. Thank you. Here we have the National Park Service. Here's our logo for the Monarch joint venture, and these are all of the organizations. We have government agencies, we have small, what is a small organization, and that's a big one. The Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center in Texas, the Cincinnati Nature Center. A lot of organizations are members of the Monarch joint venture, working together to coordinate conservation efforts. And we've gotten some kind of unusual partners. The Pheasants Forever program, you might think Pheasants Forever, but they're out there on the landscape increasing habitat, and we're really working with them to include milkweed in their mixes that people put in for pheasants. So we're promoting monarch habitat conservation. In big fields, this is great monarch habitat. Putting plantings along roadsides, that can be a little controversial because those monarchs might get hit by roads, but we think it's probably better, or by cars, but it's probably the net gain is more than the net loss. School, this is a school in Rochester, Minnesota, and in all cases we're working to increase the availability of the milkweed for the monarch caterpillars and nectar plants for the adults. They can nectar from milkweed, but they can nectar from many other flowers as well. The Milkweed Seed Increase Project, here's that field that I showed you before, growing up to produce more milkweed plants. We've identified priority states that where milkweed seed is difficult to get now, native milkweed seed. So these are partners that are really working on this. Here you see the beautiful milkweed seeds. Doing a lot of education and outreach with adult groups and kid groups and nature centers, materials to promote monarch conservation. So what can you do? You know, you as an individual person going out to help monarchs. So one of the things you can do is, as I've been saying over and over, I sound like a broken record, plant milkweed. So we've identified, and it's on the handout that's out there, divided the country into regions and identified milkweed plants that are great to grow in each of these regions. And this is just a scattering of the variety of milkweed plants out there. There are 112, some people would say more, depending if you're a lumper or a splitter, milkweed plants that are native to North America. So a lot of those are in Mexico, a lot of, none are in Canada that aren't here, but 112 in North America. And we have our common milkweed, which you're probably familiar with. Swamp milkweed, Asclepias incarnata. This is butterfly weed, which is a beautiful plant to have in your garden. This is an Arizona milkweed called Asclepias subulata. Desert milkweed, which doesn't have any leaves, which is always interesting to me. This is Asclepias viridis that grows in the south central region. Actually, I found this in southern Wisconsin. It kind of moves up. This is showy milkweed, which we have kind of in the western part of Minnesota over here. This is a really cool kind that also grows here. This is Asclepias verticillata, or floral milkweed, which has these little skinny leaves. They look like pine needles, but monarchs actually love that milkweed. So you don't have to just have boring and kind of aggressive common milkweed in your garden. You can plant all these fun kinds. You should plant flowers. Flowers are beautiful. Everyone loves flowers in a garden, and the flowers should kind of cover the whole season. So I'm not just I like native plants, but I'm not like a native plant policeman up here. This is not native. This is a lilac plant. They actually love dandelions too. Kind of through the summer, we have summer plants here, fall plants, New England aster, the blazing stars. So we just kind of need a variety of nectar sources that are there through the season. You can educate and advocate. You can plant, once you get your milkweed and your nectar plants in, you can register it. Just look for Monarch Watch. You can get one of those signs to put in your garden. On our Monarch Joint Venture website, we have a success stories maps where you can kind of mark your garden and you can tell its story. You can talk to your friends and neighbors. If you live out in the country, now this is kind of a big one. There's a lot of mowing that goes on. Now this is kind of ridiculous mowing. along this little road. This would not need to be mowed for safety reasons. And we're working right now on a fact sheet that identifies the worst and best times to mow along these country roads. It shouldn't be mowed when there are a lot of milkweed eggs and caterpillars out on that milkweed. It could be mowed earlier in the season and late in the season, or right in the middle between the two generations. So you can talk about limiting insecticide spray. You can talk about limiting herbicide use under utility rights of ways. There's a lot of kind of advocacy work that can be done. And I know that the Friends of the Mississippi does some advocacy work. So we're with you there. You can get involved in the Monarch Citizen Science Program. Lots of information out there on the web. People really have fun out there. I love the guy tiptoeing through the garden here, measuring his monarch larva monitoring site. So we have a lot of people involved with this. The data that are collected are really important. You can donate money to conservation organizations. There are some focused specifically on monarchs, the Monarch Joint Venture, the Monarch Butterfly Fund, or anything that's working to preserve monarchs. Friends groups, Nature Conservancy, national groups, local groups, anything not working to preserve monarch, anything working to preserve habitat is going to help monarchs. So the work that you're already doing is really important. So I'm going to end by saying that we need hope, we need knowledge, we need action, we need hope, but we need to be realistic. We as humans have had a big impact on the biodiversity of the world. And I think that I'm probably never going to go back to Mexico and see 18 hectares covered with monarchs. We've lost too much land. And we can't have these unrealistic goals, but we need to have good goals. So I think a lot about this middle bullet here is, in a world, if you think what I said about why people care about monarchs, and one of the things I said was they're familiar. Well, you guys saw a lot of monarchs when you were kids, but little kids right now, there aren't as many monarchs out there, and a lot of them aren't seeing monarchs. So we need to say, what does that mean for people's interest in monarchs when there aren't as many? Is that going to really change our interest, and not just in monarchs, but in other features of the natural world? So we need to get kids out seeing this stuff. We need to take them outside and get them to see things, maintain people's interest in the natural world. So again, I say monarchs, but I'm talking about anything. Monarchs are a hook. And then once we have this new normal, okay, the new normal that's a lower numbers than we saw when we were kids, but still something that's sustainable, we need to make sure that it can last. So we get enough habitat out there to save these organisms. So I believe that our efforts will be worthwhile. I once heard a talk by somebody who said, I want to be able to tell my kids that, and my grandchildren, we did our best and it was enough. Okay, we need to know that we're doing our best, but we need to know that it's working. And this is why it's worthwhile. This is why our work is worthwhile. Monarchs or anything else that we're out there working to save exists in a mosaic. So monarchs are in this mosaic of rare and pristine native prairies, one of the most rare habitats out there. But they also, I've seen a monarch on a milkweed plant. The milkweed plant was coming out of a crack on a sidewalk. So they can be in these rare and pristine native prairies and common and really disturbed habitats that are shared with many other species. They're an incredibly interesting organism. We still have a lot to learn. There's a lot we don't know about monarch migration and monarch population biology. And their migration is an unmatched biological phenomenon. There's nothing else like it. So it's worth saving. With that, I thank you. I thank everyone else who's been involved with all of my work in monarchs over 31 years, and would be happy to take any of your questions.
Okay, something before you start?
Sure.
Just to give her a breath, if you want to go get a glass of water quick. Okay. One of the reasons we invited speakers like this is that butterfly habitat also is good for water quality. It's good for resiliency in the system. Those butterfly plants put down really deep roots, as do all those other native plants. So it's really critical, as Karen stated, that we protect habitat. Those little bitty pockets that you plant in your yard help retain water and keep the runoff from coming, so you're protecting water quality as you're protecting butterflies. So it's a wonderful thing. I am going to monitor your questions, so
Okay.
I'm going to help you if we need help,
Okay,
because we want to get as many questions in as quickly as we can without
okay,
overtaxing your time.
okay,
Go ahead.
sure. Okay, I saw you first.
How does it, I live in the woods and I have locals that I plant, and they find it. Are they just randomly upon it? How do you know?
That is such a good question. So we know, it's obviously a hard question to answer. We know from a distance that they see it, and people say, well, how can they see milkweed? I can hardly see it out in the field. And I say, well, your life doesn't depend on it. So they've evolved to be able to find it. And I kind of imagine monarchs as just like this wave coming back. And they're going to find some patches and maybe not find some patches. But, right, and they found it in those cornfields. So yeah, your woods, they somehow just find it using sight and then smell. Yep. That's you next.
I'm not always positive when I see a butterfly fly that it's not a lizard.
Yeah, so part of it is habitat. So you'll see viceroys and habitats that have willows because they lay eggs on willows. But I've actually sent students out to get monarchs and they have come back with viceroys. So the viceroy, and I didn't have a picture in this talk of a viceroy, it's a butterfly that looks similar to monarchs, and really they fly a little differently, but I've been fooled too. Viceroys on average are smaller, but some monarchs are as small as viceroys. So there's not a tried and true method from a distance. You have to just get close and look closely. And I'm sorry I don't have a picture of one up here. Sometimes I wear a t-shirt with a viceroy on it just to show the difference. They have an extra stripe on their hind wing, a black stripe going across. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay.
What do you think of tourism on wintering grounds?
So that's a really complicated question. I think it's really good for people to see it, but there is no doubt that it's had a negative effect. Has anybody ever been to those sites? Okay. In fact, yeah. Have you been to the Mexican?
No, to the fish bowl.
Okay, yeah, that's a good one. So, I mean, they're there, usually it's in the dry season, there's a lot of dust. I mean, I've seen areas that used to be these beautiful, pristine paths that are now just terrible. And a part of it is people go up on horses. So instead of just one person's 2 feet, it's the heavy person on a horse and 4 feet from the horse. And it increases the damage. So I think it needs to be done better. But I don't want to just say only scientists should be able to see it. And, people that work for World Wildlife Fund and the reserve.
About the economy and people and keep it up.
Yes. It does. Yes.
Karen, I have a question, but I also want to point out that the outgoing chairman of the Council Department on National Research Person Board is present today to speak with us, Dr. Dave Clausen, who is a wonderful conservationist. Dave, stand up so they My question is, do you have any indication that the monarchs have an instinct to go during migration to feeding areas?
Probably not. It's a really interesting question. They probably don't have an instinct. Like I said before, they're kind of spread out over the landscape, and you might see them all joining in some areas. And I think it might be it's not an instinct. It's just that they've all found that area that's a good one. So I guess it is an instinct. They have an instinct to find the right kind of habitat. But it's not that they're attracted to that specific latitude and longitude on the map. They're attracted to what's in it. But it's a really interesting question. And we have the same question about those overwintering sites. How they find those, we don't know. Mm-hmm. Yes.
This is less of a question than a statement. I've been actively farming for 44 years now, and I would raise objection to some of the comments that you have made, but not seriously. But regardless of the source, the rationale, the reason, um, agricultural lands are not going to provide habitat for monarch butterflies going forward. And I don't even like that term. It's just not in the cards. And I can give you all the chapter and verse after.
I agree. I agree with that. So that's why I say we need to figure out outside. I agree, at least not for a long time. We're not going to change agricultural practices. So we just need to know that and say what else is out there.
Carolyn and I are also thinking about retiring. And we are looking at different types of housing, townhouse developments and that sort of thing. And you never see anything flowering in the acres and acres of these sorts of developments.
Right. So you pointed out two very important things. Thank you. That we're probably not going to get that agricultural habitat back, but there's a lot of other habitat that could be, lawn is not productive. Agricultural habitat is. So that you move into one of those places and tell them.
Yeah.
What they should do.
We should stand up first.
Okay. Yes. Probably not unless you could work with prairie enthusiasts. There are some groups that do that, but they're more focused on existing prairie and maintaining it. There are some programs you can work with, Department of Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife Service, partners programs that sometimes do it. But it's not that expensive to plant. And there are a lot of organizations, prairie, what's it called? Prairie restorations. It's like, brain. Prairie restorations will actually do the work for you for a fee. And they charge, depending on the plant mix you have, anywhere from kind of $3,000 to $5,000 an acre. So that's kind of pricey up front, or you can do it yourself for a lot cheaper. Yeah. Okay.
How do I know which kind of seeds to mix when I do this habitat environment adjustment that I'm about to do in a month or two?
Yep. So there you could, working with an organization like Prairie Restorations, they have a seed mix. On the Monarch Joint Venture website, we have lists. So there are lists, links, the Xerces Society. So if you kind of look online, prairie seed mixes, and or you can just work with something like Prairie Restorations, and they just have a prairie seed mix that they'll sell to you.
And it's Prairie Moon.
Prairie Moon is another one. Yeah, Prairie Moon. I don't think they will do the planting for you.
Yeah, they won't install it.
They won't install, but they have species lists. So yeah, Prairie Moon is a really good one. Landscape Alternatives is a good one.
I just want to be sure I get the right mix of seeds.
Yep.
Otherwise, if I actually do it, I don't know what they're putting in there, but I got to know what they're putting in there.
Yep.
Really.
Just ask them, do they have milkweed in it?
I could have more than that. I could have a couple of hours.
Yeah, you need the flowers, but just because some of them don't think of milkweed right off the bat. Yeah.
Last fall, there was a program over in Sturgeon Bay where they were getting people involved in marking monarchs with these little tabs. Yeah, and it was a computerized tab or something that would monitor their whole migration. Is there a program around here for that?
So Monarch Watch is a program. They're the ones that had the way station program, and they put little stickers on that are about the size. Yep, I know that program in Sturgeon Bay, about the size of your little fingernail.
Mm-hmm.
So Monarch Watch is the program that does that, and they're nationwide. Yeah. So we'll do a couple more questions. I will stay and keep answering your questions. I also have some stuff, including this T-shirt, out in the office over there. If you want to get any books, if it wasn't your birthday. But I'll take a couple more questions. Yeah.
In your slide, you said that there was 1 million acres lost, and there's so many national partners that you listed. Is there anyone monitoring the planting of the milkweed in acres or
Well, kind of yes and no. So, you know, we're really trying to encourage, in the end, it can't just be federal and state land. It's got to be private individuals, because most of the important land is owned privately. So, you know, and nobody really is monitoring that. But there is, with the presidential memorandum that came out of that meeting in Mexico, and all of the work by the Fish and Wildlife Service and other federal agencies, they are going, we're helping them with kind of a monitoring scheme to keep track of what's going in, keep track of how much milkweed survives, and whether monarchs are using that milkweed. Okay, Jamie, one more question, and then Chris wanted to just say a word too.
Is this phenomenon like anything else in the past?
The phenomenon of losing monarchs, or
The whole thing, the whole, something that, you know, was at risk of extinction, that moved forward, that recovered, something that would be a similar story.
well, there are a lot of conservation success stories. So, you know, right here, bald eagles come to mind. You know, there were very few bald eagles. There were 1,000 bison left in the world, and they recovered. They're bluebirds, yeah. So we have a lot of success stories, and those came from habitat and protection. And, you know, with the bald eagle, we figured out what the threats were, we addressed them, and the populations recovered. Wolves, Carner blues, there are more, not in Minnesota, they're gone from Minnesota, but you guys in Wisconsin are doing really well with Carner blue butterflies. So we do have some success stories.
With that, let's say thank you. I'm going to introduce Jonathan, but for a couple of you with very specific questions, there's a couple of local resources that Karen is probably not familiar with. For one thing, us. We have links to a lot of those links and species mixes and all those things. So if you have really specific questions, we can help you either connect with someone or get you started, at least at a rudimentary scale. We also have Ron Johnson in the room, who is with Standing Cedars Land Trust. So if you are interested, you live south of Highway 8, interested in doing some land protection work or some habitat restoration, Ron, will you just raise your hand? Ron is a really great guy who can maybe help direct you too. We also can connect you with people like Caitlin Smith, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, who does private lands restoration work. And if you've got 10 acres or so, she may be somebody that you want to connect with and has resources to help you, not just information, but has cost share that can help you do some planting. So if you have really specific questions, you can see us either later today or take one of our cards and give us a call or send us an email. With that, Jonathan, do you want to come forward? Jonathan is volunteer / partner / everything else.
Thank you, Deb. Yeah, thank you, Karen, for your presentation and your ongoing work. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you to the St. Croix River Association for hosting today's program and the whole speaker series. This does conclude the speaker series for this year. We can watch again for that to happen. And then thank you for your interest in this. As Dr. Oberhauser said, you know, taking action is really the critical piece. And so if we've already heard a lot of resources today for things that you can do. And so do check out Karen's table of resources in the room next door. But if you are looking for something kind of St. Croix specific, we wanted to share a new project that's just kind of very new. And it actually comes out of many of the things that Karen was speaking about. President Obama meeting with the presidents of Mexico and Canada. He signed a presidential memorandum compelling federal agencies like the National Park Service, like the U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, to get really serious about doing things in a pollinator-friendly way and protecting habitats. So, so here in the St. Croix River watershed in the Northwest Sands region, we have written a Pollinator Resolution that these federal agencies are going to get behind and abide by. But the tent is very big. Karen said that most of the land is private land, and so kind of just voluntary efforts are just as important. So this resolution actually gives the opportunity for organizations, service clubs, neighborhood or homeowners associations to sign on as well. And so if you're, and the only thing it takes to sign on is you just have to commit to some type of action. So whether that's, you know, we're gonna take 10 square feet of our backyard and we're gonna, you know, put native pollinator friendly plants there, or you're gonna, you know, donate $100 to such and such organization for, you know, for native restoration, just whatever you can kind of define what that action is. But if this is of interest to you, the Superintendent Chris Stein at the back of the room has copies of this pollinator resolution that you can take with you. And then we also have kind of a draft copy of the pollinator pledge that you can, that your organization or group can sign, effectively committing to support pollinators in this way. And if you don't, you know, if you don't take this with you and you wake up the middle of the night a week from now and say, I should have, you know, got information on that pollinator pledge, just call our visitor center at the St. Croix National Scenic Riverway, and you know, and they can put you in touch with this information. And that's actually what this banner is about right here, is supporting the pollinator pledge. So this banner will actually be starting a whirlwind tour over this season, going to Rotary conferences and other community events, making that similar pitch. So please let Chris or I know if you're interested in that. And again, Karen will be next door, and the River Association folks are also here with all of the great resources they mentioned. So with that, thank you all so much for coming, and enjoy the rest of this beautiful day.